as the lefties like to say, right?
I think if you also, look at the way the question's framed, and it's obvious why it's framed that way, because we're being presented with Mr. Wilson and Tom Marazzo as leaders of the convoy. But Tom Marazzo, in his own testimony, said he had a small role to play. And from what I could see, the only role that Tom had was to do his best impression of Neville Chamberlain and run off with Doug Ford's buddy, Dean French, and without telling the protesters on the ground, try to cut some secret deal with government officials that he was simultaneously and ever since been blasting on Twitter as institutions that have failed Canadians. But he felt it upon himself to go off with Dean French, Doug Ford's buddy, and Mr. Wilson and negotiate some kind of deal. But they weren't there originally, Sheila. And that's as per Tom's own testimony on the stand. He said, I had a small role to play in the protest. And outside of doing those negotiations with those same people that Tom on Twitter will say they're institutions that failed us, but under testimony, he said small role. Now, Derek Sloan might want to say that Tom had a super big role and other organizations because Derek's trying to fundraise and he wants to say that Tom had a big role. But of the 7 directors, including Chris Guerra, who was first on the ground, another item that's on the public record, there was no division. And the friction that was we've seen in the testimony was natural friction that would take place among people, protesters who were under the threat of a lawsuit, not even a threat. It was actually filed, had the government on top of them, and had to take care of protesters on the ground. And it's unfortunate that, the question's phrased like that because they want to spin it in a certain way where by Ben defending himself, that's division. But where was the division? It was when, unfortunately, Mr. Wilson took the stand on the Wednesday, the day before Ben was going to testify. Ben was on November 3rd. Mr. Wilson was the day before. And the lawyers supposedly representing the convoy organizers attacked Ben. Mr. Wilson suggested he didn't know what happened to the Bitcoin, which it's a matter of public record. He was the lawyer on the file when he submitted those affidavits on behalf of Nicholas St. Louis and Ben and the others, and it got handed over into escrow. And this idea that Mr. Wilson used this word sabotage of the convoy in testimony. I mean, mercy, like if he wasn't protected by the privilege of a public inquiry, I don't think he'd ever say that in public on a show with you. And so he injected all this division and hostility because the lawyers supposedly representing the convoy, even though they're not representing all 7 of the original directors, they're barely maybe representing the majority. And 2 of them, Tamara and Chris Barber, are silenced. They are trying to spin this narrative at the inquiry, which is different than what they were saying back in January and February. Remember, Mr. Wilson was saying this is a legal protest, and a judge stated in a decision it's a legal protest. That never happened, but that was Mr. Wilson's interpretation. Now he's trying to say it was chaos, and they went off on their own, those 3 individuals, to do their best Neville Chamberlain impersonation, cut a deal with the big bad government, and move trucks out of the way. So they've changed their story. They're giving justification at the inquiry for Trudeau's use of the Emergency Act. And it's a different story and a different script than they were telling the public and the protesters back in January and February. So if we're looking at any friction, it's by those people, Dean French, Tom Marazzo, Keith Wilson, that showed up after it started and have decided to announce themselves, in Keith and Tom's view, as the spokespeople for everything that happened. And it's not really on behalf of the original 7 directors, that's for sure, because Tamara backed up everything Ben said in her testimony.